those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Elise Steele. I'm on staff here at the Vineyard doing outreach. And so usually I'm not on the teaching team here, so we have a lovely group of people who come up here every Sunday to give the message who are way more qualified than me. But it turns out it's in my job description to every now and again, once in a blue moon, give a sermon on, let's take this off. Yeah, I think that helps the sound. To give a sermon on something involving outreach. So today is that day. So thanks for having me with you. I'm actually going to start out with this story of a girl named Christina who is like my personal hero. She's awesome. 2 summers ago, I got to go to Beirut, Lebanon for the first time. It was an incredible experience, and I got to go again this past summer. But one of the friends I made there, her name is Christina. She is actually from Syria, originally from Damascus. She loves Syria and Damascus. She just talks about it all the time. She's constantly saying come with me, I can take you, I'll sneak you in. And just because she loves it so much, it's such a beautiful place to her. But about 4 years ago, she moved from Syria to Lebanon, not actually as a refugee, because at the time, Damascus at least was safe from ISIS and from Assad for the most part. So she didn't need to leave due to that reason, but actually the Lord had put it on her heart. She is a Christian, and the Lord had put it on her heart to minister to her people who were living in Lebanon. And so about 4 years ago, she moved to Beirut just to do that. So she started working for New Heights, which is the organization that I got to work for there, and she's been doing it ever since. And obviously her family back home has just been crumpling and seeing these things, and the things that she's seen even when she was in Syria are, of course, just crazy and unimaginable for most of us, but she's been doing ministry ever since, and she's just great. Is the slide working now, Angela? So the picture of me and the tiny little girl, that's Christina. She's 2 years older than me, but she's just really tiny. But the reason why I wanted to talk about her today is because I have this really awesome memory. We have so many memories of kind of after work, walking around downtown and just hanging out. It wasn't full, crazy ministry time all the time. We kind of had a 9-to-5 sort of deal. And so one night, in particular, we were out in a neighborhood called Hamra, which is a neighborhood in Beirut that is known for being kind of the hip, cool college neighborhood. And so we were walking around downtown, we had gotten some food, and we were just having a good time. And we saw this little boy come up to us and ask us if we would buy a flower from him. And that was nothing abnormal. Syrian kids happen to just be kind of all over the streets. And we as Americans are kind of warned that, the kind of typical, if you give money to one, then they'll all swarm you, and it's probably not even going to be helpful to give them money anyway, because often they have people above them who are essentially, it's not a great situation. So we kind of just learned to turn a blind eye to these people. But this night in particular, we were with Christina. You can see her down there in the middle bottom. And she stopped and she just started talking to this boy. Granted, she also had the advantage that she spoke fluent Arabic, unlike us. But she got to talk to him, and she was translating everything for us so we could hear. And we learned all about this kid. His name is Mahmoud. He's from Syria, but he's been living in Lebanon. I think at this point it had only been about a year for him. Not able to go to school, kind of did this selling flowers on the street thing all the time. And we learned so much about this kid. We learned that he wanted to be a singer when he grew up, and he actually stopped for us in the middle of the street, sang for us, and he was great. And he was a fun kid, and he laughed, and we got to know him so well. And we got to do that because Christina took the time to actually stop, and despite all of the kids everywhere, and despite being in refugee camps the entire week and being overwhelmed with all of that hurt, she took the time to kneel and to get to know him and to enter into his brokenness. And I just remember feeling so struck by that. After all the things that she's seen, after every refugee that she's encountered in the past 4 years, I would be a little calloused, not because, mainly just to protect my own heart, I think. I would have to harden or callous myself. She just hasn't. She has been able to do this and has just still such a soft heart of being able to see Mahmoud on the street and take the time to get to know and love him. So we'll come back to Christina in a bit, but right now I'm going to read from Luke chapter 16, 19 through 31. Feel free to follow along if you have a Bible, but you can also just keep reading. This is from the English Standard Version. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things, and now he is comforted here and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they may not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let him listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to tell them, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." Now, the story has some crazy implications, especially at the end for us on its own, but I'm actually going to focus on the beginning of the story and their time on earth. Now, first of all, can I just say that I love that in the story, Lazarus gets a name and the rich guy doesn't. It's like at the end of the movie with the credits roll, you know how there's like random guy. In God's movie, Lazarus gets a name and it's just rich guy. And I just think that's great. And he's not even the first or the last rich guy in the gospel, so I actually, just for fun today, I'm going to call him rich guy number 3. So play along, that's how I'm going to refer to him. So what do we know about rich guy number 3? Well, we know he was really, really rich, right? He dressed in purple and fine linen, which was no joke back then. Purple was only from like a certain area of the certain place that they could get the dye, and so it meant that he wasn't just like living good, he was like really, really rich. We know that he knew God, right? When he saw Abraham, he called out to him and said, "Father Abraham." So we can assume that he probably grew up in a good Christian, a good Jewish family. He kind of knew all of the right things, and maybe, this is speculation, but maybe he even saw all of his wealth as a sign that he was good, that God had favor on him, and that he should just keep doing him, and he was doing good. We also knew that he went to hell. So we know based on this story that he didn't truly know God, he knew about God, and as we know, that's not enough. In James it says, "You believe that God is one, even the demons believe that and shudder." So rich guy number 3 knew about God, but he hadn't truly encountered God. Let him change his heart, let him have the driver's seat, etc. So what else? We know that Lazarus has 3 brothers that he cared about and kind of wanted to essentially use Lazarus to save them. And finally, we do know that he saw Lazarus, right? That he knew Lazarus. It doesn't actually say, we could read just the first part and say, oh, maybe he didn't actually notice him. Maybe he walked past and he was there, but he just never saw. It wasn't that he was purposefully ignoring him, but when, after they died, he asked Father Abraham specifically for Lazarus by name. So we know that he consciously ignored him as he was lying at his gate. So what does this have to do with us? It seems a little extreme, right? A starving man with open sores just laying at his gate, and rich guy number 3 completely ignores him until they die. The guy's a jerk, right? Like, we don't see ourselves in this story. It's not relatable. Or we don't want to see ourselves in the story. We like to say, but I'm not living in luxury every day like rich guy number 3 was, and I don't have anyone on my doorstep certainly asking for crumbs. Of course not. But then I think of how often I do turn a blind eye to real brokenness and pain and suffering. See, times have changed since this time. With rich guy number 3 at that time, his Lazarus was really obvious. He got to see Lazarus probably every day, physically right there in the flesh. He saw the sores that the dogs were licking. He knew the hunger. There was probably other pain around, sure, but his Lazarus was obvious. That was the one that he shoulda, coulda cared about. But with us, it might not be so painfully obvious. Thanks to culture and technology, we are keenly aware of problems all around the country and around the world, as if they were at our very gate asking for crumbs. This can be such a good thing, of course, because it allows us to get involved in things that 100 years ago we didn't even know were problems. But often, instead, I just feel overwhelmed. I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but sometimes as I'm scrolling through the news or whatever, I just don't even know where to start. So who is our Lazarus? Is it the people in our town that have been living in tents all winter? Is it the victims of serious racism and structural inequalities even in our own backyard? Is it the immigrant who feels just unwanted? Is it the person in India or China or Bangladesh who made the clothes that they're wearing on our backs? The foster child? The heroin addict? The people across the world who die from really preventable causes like the lack of clean water or a mosquito net or a vaccine? Is it the sweet refugees that I got to meet in Lebanon? I read a blog post recently that reminded me so simply, it was a simple reminder, but a good one, that we humans weren't meant to be on mission. We, in the garden, we didn't even know good and evil before the fall, let alone all of the evil of the world. So yeah, it feels overwhelming when we read the news or open social media or see another mass shooting or another oppressive dictator, another chemical attack. It should feel overwhelming. But I think we have a real choice in what we do with that. We can harden ourselves, maybe tune it out, protect our heart. Sounds good, by just not letting it break and just letting that be another statistic. Sometimes we kind of feel like we have to do that. Or we can make the bold and inconvenient and sometimes painful choice to stop and allow our hearts to truly break for these hurts. Now, of course, there's a middle ground a little bit, as we can't just break down sobbing every time we look at the news. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're anything like me, at least, you might need to challenge yourself to actually take time for real heartbreak so that you don't become calloused and hardened. Schedule time to feel moved. That sounds like a silly thing to schedule, I know, but I think we should take it seriously. Romans 12 says, to weep with those who weep. And I truly believe that before we act, before we donate or serve or feed or bandage, that we need to feel. And this doesn't always just happen naturally. We have to give ourselves space to say, Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours. Isn't that a part of what we don't see in rich guy number 3? He was able to walk right past Lazarus, hungry and covered in sores, and continue with life as usual. He clearly never let himself feel for Lazarus. By the way, Jesus, on the other hand, was so good at this, of course, because it's Jesus, but truly feeling other people's pain. In the story of the other Lazarus, the one who got raised from the dead, I love that story because we see Jesus crying along with his friends, even though he knew what was about to happen. John 11, starting in verse 33, says, when Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. Isn't that cool of Jesus? Like, he could have just healed him right there, but he took the time to feel and see and experience their pain. He wept. Then he moved into action. And we know what happens next. Mary and everyone else there gets to see their beloved Lazarus live again, breathe again. Now, if Jesus takes time to weep before raising the dead, I sure as heck want to do that before I try helping anyone. So I encourage you, as I'm encouraging myself, to try to do this more. And when it doesn't come naturally, to ask the Lord to give us a softened heart of radical and difficult compassion and empathy. But of course, we don't stop there. We act, we go, we serve, we feed, we bandage the sores. I'm not going to give you all of the verses to support the fact that we should be doing this, because I think hopefully we're on the same page that we should be doing these things and we should be the hands and feet of Christ. But we let our changed hearts start to change our actions. And through the power and authority of Jesus, we're able to be restorers and reconcilers in the world. We have the power that when we read the news or check social media or walk outside and encounter real brokenness, we feel for them and then we do something. We can do something. We have power, and we shouldn't let Satan tell us otherwise. But now I'm not as naive as you might think I sound. I know that we can't actually do it all. Every one of us is just one person with our own passions and talents and giftings and limitations. So it would be ridiculous to say that every single broken thing we see, you should start weeping and then you should fix it. I know that that's not realistic. I do still think that weeping is good, just to check in and make sure we still have a pulse. But there are some things that we need to give to God and trust. We can still pray about all of the broken things and pray like it matters, because it does, but it's okay to have some issues that we do more with because we can't do it all. I'm all about refugees. That's my Lazarus. It's in my heart, and I know it, and I can't overlook it. And even when I'm in a place where it's not as relevant all the time, I'm working towards that. But I'm so glad there are people out there who have given their whole heart to clean water filters for people who are dying from ingesting parasites. That's their Lazarus. And I'm so, so glad that that's their Lazarus. I'll probably still tell them stories about Lebanon and refugees and what I've seen, because that's where my heart is, but I'll also listen and enter into the pain when they tell me about what's happening in Gajito, Peru, where they brought the water filters. Then I'll pray and I'll encourage, and at the end of the day, I'll have hope for those families in Gajito that comes not from some vague feeling that everything's just going to work out, probably, but from actively giving that issue to our loving and powerful God. That's the hope that keeps us from being crushed by everything we see in this broken world and all that we let ourselves feel. It's the hope that allows us to, in Galatians 6:9 says, not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. It's the hope that comes from knowing sometimes earthly pain prevails for no reason that's obvious to us, but we know that there is an end. We know that in the end of this story, Lazarus got to be in heaven. Nothing else mattered. God knew Lazarus. And if it weren't for these promises, we would be crushed. I would be crushed by all of the need out there. So as we encounter pain and brokenness in the world, in person or behind a screen, or when we step outside of our doorstep or whatever, ask God to take you to new levels of empathy and compassion to the point where it's frankly inconvenient. And as you do this, ask God, who is my Lazarus? Who can we just not walk past anymore, and what can we do about it? It'll probably be somebody different every day, maybe even every hour. But we need to allow God to let us enter back into that. So back to Christina. You can put the picture back up, Angela. What we gained that day was just incredible. And one other thing that I should mention is that the ministry I was working with, that Christina also worked for, New Heights, they did pretty solely just ministry. They're really good at a few things. Drama ministry, we brought bouncy castles into refugee camps. So it was really cool. They were really good at certain things. There was a lot of other need there. We would have loved to feed the children, to give water to the children, to give better homes, to give them the soccer ball that they really wanted. But we knew our limitations because it didn't make sense for a small organization. This is run by like 5 Lebanese and Syrian people, and that's it. So instead they went in with other organizations like UNICEF, who was giving the housing, or World Vision, who was giving the food, and they did what they did well. But Christina didn't take that too strongly into her personal life, right? So she didn't say, well, okay, my whole ministry is this specific refugee camp thing. She was able to enter into the brokenness. And I learned so much from that, and I hope that we all kind of start to have hearts more like Christina, where we know our calling and we know the need that God has put on our heart, but we can also stop, and when God puts a need in front of us, rather than being hardened and callous, we can really enter into that. I'm going to pray for us. Lord God, thank you that you have a heart that beats for justice and for compassion and for mercy. God, thank you that you see every tear that anyone sheds, and that you promise us that one day they will get wiped away, Lord. I pray that we can have softer hearts, Lord, that we can start to have our hearts broken for what breaks yours, and that'll move us to action. But just not just random or unplanned action, but really strategic action for your kingdom, God. That we can work alongside you, work with you, that we can have all of this start with a heart of compassion and empathy and brokenness. Lord, pray that we can be a little bit more like Christina in just the way that she is able to stop everything, and despite her past and despite everything she's seen, look at each person like it's the first person that she's ever seen, and just weep with them, Lord. We love you, and it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.